Hello friends, my name is Leigh and I create videos about photography as an art and as a lifestyle. A couple of months ago, I took a short trip to Washington, D.C. and the only camera that I took with me was the Leica D-Lux 8. You'll have seen my initial thoughts on the camera in my video that published on launch day, but I will link to that in the description of this video. However, spoiler alert, I ordered my own because I fell in love with it as an easy, everyday carry camera, plus for things like B-roll and product photos when I'm in the field with other cameras. I've been using it as both, and I've loved it. But what I discovered on that Washington, D.C. trip is that, one, I do love this camera, and two, I figured out my perfect setup, including the customizable buttons and dials, along with the settings for the 3 user profiles that you can set in the camera. In this video, I will share the photos from the trip to DC, but also how I set my camera and user profiles, along with how I used each of those for the different outings. Let's start with the customizable buttons and dials. There are 3 buttons and a wheel that you can customize on the camera. First, the thumb wheel. I chose auto here, which is how the camera is set when it arrives. I nearly always have this camera in aperture priority and auto ISO, and in that case, the wheel adjusts exposure compensation. There is a neat chart in the manual that tells you exactly what that wheel will do in each mode. There is a button in the center of the wheel, and you have all sorts of options to choose from for its behavior, but I chose for it to bring me to my user profiles. This way, I can quickly swap amongst them. This is helpful for me when I'm using it for my work, but I know a lot of people like to have this button set to ISO, which brings up the ISO sensitivity adjustment on the screen. Now for these 2 buttons. These each can, again, be set to many options. For the button on the right, I chose for it to swap between still photos and video. This button is easy for me to reach with my thumb while still holding the camera up to my eye, and especially when I'm using the camera for work, I do a lot of switching between photo and video mode. And last, the button on the left, which I have set to switch amongst the viewing options, whether I'm using the LCD screen or the viewfinder. This camera doesn't have a flip-up screen, but I still use it for low or high-angle shots where I'm looking at the LCD screen instead of the viewfinder. Moving on to user profiles. What are they? This is called different things on different cameras and brands, but for Leica, it is called a user profile. This is where you can assign a group of settings to a particular profile. So when you swap profiles, you change numerous settings at once. First is the default profile. That cannot be changed and is always a way for you to quickly get back to baseline settings. I used this the first evening that we were there for a walk around the neighborhood, and you can see that it will give you bright but still natural colors. And basically, the camera is easy to use. I created user profile 1 on day 1 of the trip when Raymond and I were in the car on the way to the Udvar-Hazy Center in Dulles. This place is amazing, by the way. If you are at all into aerospace, I highly recommend a visit. I wanted a natural, almost muted look to the photos and videos that I captured there. This is a very busy place with a ton of air and spacecraft right next to each other and stacked on top of each other. There are a lot of hard lines and bright colors, so I wanted to soften all of that through manipulating color a bit. I also knew I wanted to choose my autofocus point so each photo or video was focused exactly where I wanted, which is a common way for me to shoot in most settings. Looking at the menus, here's how I achieved that and set up this user profile. I won't talk about every setting on the menu, but you can see them as we scroll through and we'll hit the high points. In focus mode, I set this to AFS and field. This allows me to choose my focus point and the camera focuses when I half press the shutter release button. Under focus aid, I turn AF assist lamp off. I am in museums often and you are not allowed to expose the art to any lighting whatsoever, so I always turn this off on all of my cameras and I leave it off. I mentioned earlier that I like to use auto ISO. I want to allow the camera to use the highest possible if needed, so I changed that setting. I often like to shoot in DNG or RAW, plus JPEG so that I have the raw files if needed. That being said, sometimes I delete the raw files as I am transferring the images to my hard drive. Under JPEG settings, I choose my film style, which changes the look of the images and the video. I chose natural, and I even customized it so it looks exactly like I wanted. As you remember, I wanted a muted look. We will come back to this film style a little bit later in the video though. You see Leica photos here. I do use the Photos app on my phone as an external monitor and remote for the D-Lux 8 when I'm filming myself. It works extremely well. And under camera settings and acoustic signal, I turn everything off. I don't want my camera making any kind of noises. Before we save these settings as user profile 1, I need to modify my video settings. Switching over to video, I want mostly the same settings. I do need to make sure that I'm in 4K 30p, that I have the modified natural film style set, and I have to set the thumb wheel and the 3 customizable buttons as well. I want them to operate the same as when I'm in still photo mode, so that's what they're set for. And now we head to User Profile, Manage Profile, and Save as Profile, and choose Profile 1. These settings were perfect for that day. I changed my aperture depending upon the photo, though because of the dim setting of the museum, I generally kept it quite wide. I exercised the zoom of the lens, and I thoroughly enjoyed having a small camera as I was learning and enjoying myself there. For day 2 in DC, I created Profile 2. I am a big fan of Leica's high contrast monochrome film style, and that's what I wanted for my day of slow, solo art appreciation at the National Gallery of Art. However, I only wanted to change the film style. I wanted everything else to remain the same as Profile 1. The autofocus settings, the lack of acoustic signals, the customizable buttons, all of that. So to make it easy on myself, I set my camera to User Profile 1, which I already had set up, and I went from there. Don't worry though, I will come back around to why this didn't mess up User Profile 1 in just a minute. The day prior, I customized the natural film style, but like I said, I enjoy the high contrast monochrome film style as is. So I simply set my still photo setting and my video setting to it. Then, because I was already in Profile 1, everything else is set the way that I want. So I go to User Profile, Manage Profile, and Save as Profile, and then choose Profile 2. Now I have Profile 1 still saved with the natural film style, but now I also have Profile 2 saved with the high contrast monochrome film style. I spent many hours at the museum that day, and I felt like I could have spent a week there. It has several levels and areas, so many rooms, a big cafeteria. I loved it. When I go to museums, I see a lot of folks simply capturing documentary type photos of the art, and that's totally fine. I do that too sometimes, but generally I want to use the museum spaces and the art as a springboard for my own art. I like to find lines and shapes, light and shadow within the spaces. I even like to do my own style of street photography within the museum because I really enjoy seeing other people enjoying art. It was a real treat to see an artist doing a study of landscape painting in one of the galleries. I stood and marveled at her talent for quite some time. And that was all for my time in DC, but I knew I needed one very important user profile on the camera, one for filming myself. And this one can double as a good profile for portraits. So for Profile 3, I started with Profile 1 because I wanted to use that natural film style. However, I did not want the changes to saturation and contrast that I had dialed in on day 1 of my trip. Here's something to remember. When you modify the settings within a film style, like saturation or contrast like I did, you are changing them across the board. Those modifications don't save to the user profile. Rather, they are saved to the film style. And what that means is if I took out those modifications, they would be taken out of User Profile 1 as well. Profile 1 would still use the natural film style, just not the extra adjustments to saturation and contrast that I had made on day one of the trip. For me, that's fine. I made those adjustments for a specific outing. I really don't need or want them to be applied in the future when I choose to use Profile 1. So, back into the menus. Heading over to JPEG settings, I choose my film style, which changes the look on the images and the video. I was already in natural, but then I took out the adjustments to saturation and contrast. Now, whether I am in Profile 1 or 3, I will have the natural film style with no adjustments. If I want to make adjustments on any particular outing, I can simply make them and then change it back when I'm done if I want. There is one more adjustment I need to make here to how the camera autofocuses. Because I want this profile to work well for portraits and for filming myself, I want to set focus mode to AFC so the camera continuously focuses when I half press the shutter release button, and I need to use eye and face detect. Of course, I have to go into video mode and make those same changes. And then I can head to User Profile, Manage Profile, Save as Profile, and choose Profile 3. Ta-da! It takes a little bit of time to initially set up the camera between the buttons and the user profiles, but it's well worth it to me. I truly use this camera just about every single day for work and for myself. When I'm out on a hike with the camera or just capturing photos every day, I generally don't make a lot of settings changes, but for my work, these customizable function buttons and profiles are a necessity. I have the buttons and the thumb wheel set up to always behave the same, but I have those 3 user profiles set for the 3 types of photography and videography that I do most often with this camera. Now, will these settings be the only settings that I ever use? No. Will I ever make changes to the user profiles? Probably. But right now, these are working really well for me. By the way, on this trip to DC, Raymond took a Fujifilm X-T50, and there is a video already published with his results from the trip. I will link to that in the description of this video. Like I said earlier, there will also be a link to my initial review video of this D-Lux 8. But that's all for today. I would love to hear from you in the comments. How do you set up your camera, whether it's the Leica D-Lux 8 or something else entirely? I'd especially like to know if you use user profiles or your camera's equivalent, and what the purpose of each is for you. How are they different from mine? I always enjoy hearing how other people use their tools to create their art. I do have a video planned where Raymond and I pit the D-Lux 8 against my beloved Leica Q2. Why would someone want one or the other? And why in the world do I have both? So make sure that you are subscribed so that you see my new videos when they are published. While you're subscribing, you may as well click that like button. Subscribing, liking videos, and commenting are huge helps for the channel. Thank you for watching.